Hello again. This should be the last. We should be able to finish the play in this video. Uh, this is the ending of The Contract, a one-act play. Eddie has accused Arthur of murdering his wife, Sylvie, and Arthur is still trying to deny it.
That pretty blouse she was wearing, how'd it get ripped? Maybe the cat ripped it.
All right, here's the true story. I think this will work better. The three of them, he, the woman, and the cat, they were standing at the top of the stairs, and she tripped over the cat, and the cat was afraid. The cat...
What cat was that, Artie? What's the name of the cat in the story?
Muffy. Muffy was frightened, and she ran. The woman, Sylvie, that was her name. She started to fall. He, the man in the story, Arthur. Okay, I'll say it. Me, Arthur. I clutched Sylvie's blouse after the cat tripped her as she was going down in an effort to save her. The blouse ripped. Okay, that's not exactly what I told the police. It was stupid, I know, to tell them I was in the other room, but I was afraid I'd be wrongly accused. I'll go to the police station, explain everything, and get it all straightened out.
They'll be here in a little while, Artie. We gotta straighten this out now, or we don't get to collect on the contract. When Sylvie fell, you reached out and grabbed her to keep her from falling. Like how? Show me.
Arthur stands and he slowly raises his hands, reaches toward Eddie.
It had to be quicker than that. By the time you grabbed me, I'd have been all the way down the stairs. This time, when I fall, you do just what you did when Sylvie fell.
Eddie starts to fall, and Arthur, seeing an opportunity for escape, grabs Eddie, and a struggle for Eddie's gun ensues, and they're both trying to grab onto the gun. Eddie brings down the butt of the gun onto Arthur's head and sets the momentarily stunned Arthur back in his swivel chair.
Geez, Artie, you scratched me. See what you did? Just like the scratches they found on Sylvie. You think maybe the cat did that?
And Arthur just sits dejected in his chair as Eddie's pacing back and forth in the room thinking. And then he swivels real quickly to face Arthur.
This is going to make a great story, Artie. Are you ready?
And Arthur's ready. And they resume their Eddie's dictation and Arthur's typing as Eddie continues to tell the greatest story that ever happened.
The guy didn't want to say he killed his wife, but then Eddie told him he got no other way out, and they had to collect on the contract. They couldn't weasel around no more on account of the cops would come in. They didn't have time for that. So the guy finally said he murdered his wife.
Arthur. Now Arthur's speaking as he types. As Arthur types, he's speaking the words. I confess to the murder of my wife, Sylvie. As he continues typing, as Arthur continues typing his confession, Eddie is walking around the room looking for a missing item, apparently. He's looking around for something. And he's continuing to dictate the story to Arthur as Arthur's typing. But he's distracted.
Sylvie was a nice girl that never hurt anybody. And they've been married a long time, and all that time he said he was going to write a great book. Only he never done that.
Eddie doesn't see what he's looking for, and he leaves the room. Arthur, oblivious of Eddie's departure, continues typing and speaking his confession. I always felt that she was keeping me from my work, that I could write only by immersing myself fully in the fictional world, a world that she could never enter. The harsh light of truth that illuminates the fictional world was unsuited to her delicate nature. Yet how could I leave her alone and unprotected in the non-fictional world, with all its dangers and treachery? So I was stuck, unable to write the book I dreamed of writing, and, unfair as it was to her, my resentment toward her grew steadily. Her heart had been weak for some time, and I worried that if she ever fell down the stairs it might kill her. Even as I warned her repeatedly about the danger of falling, the thought grew inside me that there is very little difference between a fall, which might happen by accident, and a fall precipitated by a push. One might push any one of a number of things, a button, for example. One might fall. Eddie comes back into the room with a straight-back chair, places it in the center of the room, and looks up at the ceiling as Arthur continues his confession. A particular event might consist of a coincidence of these two common and innocent occurrences. I regretted my action even as Sylvie started to fall, and I clutched her blouse in an effort to save her. And Eddie's fussing with the chair on the floor, getting it placed where he wants it.
You're weaseling, Artie. Readers always know when you do that.
Even now I can tell the truth only with the most diligent of effort. No, I didn't and I will spare the reader and myself the graphic details. No, I didn't regret my action, at least not until later. She was still alive when I went down the stairs, and I don't know to what, if any degree.
Hey, Artie, you got any rope?
Kitchen table, Eddie. To what degree she was conscious. Her body was limp. I held her head. I gripped her head. I cradled her. Yeah, that's it. I cradled her head in my hands and noted its weight to be about the same as a bowling ball. I raised her head and then released my hands and let the head fall once against the concrete floor. Eddie comes in with a rope, and as Arthur continues typing and reading his confession, Eddie is trying to tie a noose. He gets it almost all the way, and then he lets go and noose falls apart. And then he tries again, as Arthur continues. That did it. In the ensuing days, my resentment, along with my continuing inability to write anything of literary value, continued to grow. I started blaming the cat. It distracted me by meowing continually and prowled the house, seemingly looking for Sylvie. I poisoned the cat's food and sent her to be with my wife. I'd killed a little bit of Sylvie every day in little ways for many years, and then I killed the rest of her by pushing her down the basement stairs. Then I tried to kill my guilt by killing her cat, whose name, it should be noted, was Muffy, and who was a good cat. Also, if this is to be a full and accurate account, I must note that Sylvie was a nice girl and a good wife. It is not for me, the author of this story, written in the true confessional genre, to assign a relative measure of culpability to each of these crimes, and so I leave that for the reader to ponder. I, who must stand alone as the only author of my life and also of my death, accept full responsibility. I am guilty of all of these murders, excepting the murder of my guilt, of which I am only guilty of attempted murder. I deeply regret each and all of these actions.
That's great, Artie. That's the greatest thing you ever wrote.
What? It's good, isn't it, Eddie? I don't believe I've ever written anything with such power, such passion, and such truth in my entire literary career. Flashing blue lights are coming in through the Venetian blinds.
You know how to tie a necktie, Artie? I never learned how.
Arthur gets up and walks over to Eddie. Of course, Eddie. Well, you must have wondered how your tie gets put on every morning. Here, let me show you. And Arthur's working, untying and retying Eddie's necktie for him as the two men talk.
Hey, Artie, remember the part in Lead for Louie when my shoes come untied running down the alley and I didn't have time to tie them?
Uh-huh.
Well, I always wondered how they got tied after they come loose like that. I mean, you never had me tie any shoes in all of the stories you wrote about me. You never showed me that. I mean, I looks down at my shoes and they're tied, and I never know how it happens.
Arthur's working on Eddie's tie. I tie them when you're sleeping, Eddie. Every morning, just before you wake up, I come into your room, put your shoes on your feet, and tie them. And as soon as I finish showing you how to tie your necktie, I'll show you how to tie your own shoes.
No, Artie, we don't got time for that. Don't worry, I'll get me a pair of loafers or something.
Now that there's banging on the door, and they ignore this. They don't. It's as though they don't even hear it. Arthur, and that's how you tie a necktie.
Thanks, Artie. Only that ain't the kind of necktie I was talking about. I mean, this kind.
And he holds out the rope to Arthur. Well, I learned some knots when I was in the Boy Scouts, but they never showed us how to.
You're weaseling, Artie. I know you. You always does your research. That's why you had this rope out on the kitchen table. You practiced tying a necktie for the part in The Lonely Gun where they hung the guy on account of he shot that poor horse in the knee.
I can't fool you, can I, Eddie? Arthur takes the rope from Eddie, very quickly and expertly ties a noose and tosses it to Eddie. The horse ran free at the end, by the way. Eddie's places the noose around Arthur's neck.
That's nice. He probably got a nice girlfriend by now.
And now, as Arthur's speaking, Eddie is fussing with the noose around Arthur's neck, which is hanging down like a necktie, in the same way that Arthur was fussing with Eddie's necktie. Now Eddie's fussing with Arthur's necktie. Yes, Eddie, that's at the end of the book. After they hang the cowboy, Wesley, the townspeople, who have nursed the horse back to health, open the corral, and the horse runs off across the plain as the sun is setting, toward this wild filly who's running toward him. They meet, snort, rub noses, and gallop off together into the sunset as the townspeople cheer in the shadow of the gallows.
Ah, that's great, Artie. But it ain't as great as this one's gonna be.
More knocking on the door, and police officer's voice from outside the house. Police, open the door, now!
We still got a minute, Artie. I lock the door when I come in.
For what it's worth, Eddie, I never hurt any children.
You's never had any toy?
Eddie makes a final adjustment to the noose around Arthur's neck, which is hanging down like a necktie. Eddie steps back to inspect.
Perfect.
The two men embrace one another, pat each other on the back, and Eddie steps back again. I don't think I can go through with this, Eddie. Eddie goes to the computer and sits, looks at Arthur and holds his fingers up over the keyboard. And Arthur, mesmerized, gazes at Eddie's fingers.
I'm gonna type the words for you.
Thank you, Eddie. And Eddie's like this. He's thinking and he types a little bit and shakes his head, deletes the words.
Nah, that ain't right. Let's try again.
What's wrong, Eddie?
I think I got that, what do you call, a writer's block. I can't think of the right words.
Just tell it straight and simple, Eddie. What happened next?
Okay, let's see. The guy, he thought about all of the things in his life. Like, the time that...
For Christ's sakes, Eddie!
You think the pacing's too slow?
Yes!
The guy got up on the chair.
Arthur stands on the chair. And for the rest of this, Arthur does everything that Eddie types.
He threw the rope over the ceiling joist. There would have been a floor joist if they had kids, but they didn't.
Arthur throws the rope over the beam.
He unloosened the noose and twined it around to the back of his neck, so it wasn't hanging down like a necktie.
And Arthur adjusts the noose.
Then he pulled the rope tight around his neck and tied some kind of knot. And I don't know what kind of knot it was.
It's a running bowline, Eddie, to secure it to the joist. And he didn't pull the rope all the way tight. He left some slack so as not to drag out the ending.
He tied a running bowline to secure it to the joist and left some slack in the rope.
So now, at this point in the play, Arthur is standing on the chair, the noose is around his neck and pointing up, so all he's really got to do now is all tie. He's just got to step off the chair, and that'll be the end of the story. And Eddie, are you sure this is right? It's a flawless story so far, and I don't want there to be any way for me to weasel out of this at the last second. And Eddie goes like, I mean, it has to be a pure, unalloyed expression of our artistic integrity. Art is true life. That's the only way the story will work, with no weaseling, no self-deception, no complex rational constructions, and with the minimum number of words. The Arthur character must look himself in the eye and be held fully accountable in every way.
You mean, is it gonna go off perfect? Me, I don't know. That's up to you, Artie. But at least it's going to be a mostly true story. The fact that your talent is limited is actually a good thing here, because it is only thereby that it may be exceeded by your self-awareness, which in this case is more than normally you or most other guys would have under circumstances such as these. So I guess we're probably going to collect on some of the contract, and that ain't so bad.
Make copies, Eddie, and send them to the editors of every major publishing house. As Arthur continues speaking his little speech, Eddie's getting bored and he looks around on the desk. He finds a Tootsie Roll Pop. And he's never seen one before, so he's like, what's this? He shakes it, sniffs it, puts it to his ear, and then cautiously unwraps it and puts it in his mouth. This is perhaps the greatest moment in literature. The climactic scene that is the culmination of everything for which I and countless authors throughout history have worked. When I first walked into this room, I saw all that empty space in which my stories would bloom. And for 30 years I sat at that very desk where you, Eddie, sit now, casting elements of imagination into space. I see it, Eddie. Up there, from elements, attracting, combining, and coalescing, acquiring mass, shape, and gravity.
Hey, these are pretty good, Artie. What do you call them?
A world hovering in space, in this room. People live there, Eddie. People like you, in the world of a story. You and I know it isn't dark. It's filled with light. And Eddie types.
Then the guy kicked the chair out from under him.
Nothing happens, and Eddie waits, and he limbers the fingers of his hands and stretches his shoulders. He's becoming quite the little writer now. He may, in fact, be on the verge of a successful literary career. Who knows?
Come on, Artie. The story ain't no good without the ending.
There's more knocking on the door. Police officer's voice from outside the house. We have a warrant. Get away from the door. We're coming in.
Hurry up. Hurry up, Artie. We gotta collect on the contract.
Now, in the play, at this point, Arthur's gonna, we know what Arthur's gonna do next. So, either his body is in shadow or there's a scrim or something, and we hear Arthur shout, "For art!" And then we hear the sound of a chair toppling, and we see Arthur's body swinging from a rope.
Artie.
The sound of a door being broken in. 2 police officers enter with guns drawn. They stop and gaze at Arthur for a moment. Eddie doesn't pay any attention to the officers, who don't recognize his presence either. He puts the Tootsie Roll Pop in his mouth and looks at the computer screen. As he works out the ending of the story, the police holster their guns and gaze in shock at Arthur's body. Eddie types,
And then he wasn't a weasel no more. End of story.
Eddie pushes a button to start the printer. The printer is ejecting sheets into the tray. One of the officers hears that and looks over, sees the sheets coming out. Still doesn't see Eddie, he just sees the sheets coming out, the papers. He goes over, he picks up a sheet of paper that comes off. He starts, reads it to himself, and then he looks up at Arthur. And the curtain falls, and that's the end of our play. No. I don't know who would actually want to, what general audience would actually want to see this play. It's pretty dark, but maybe it's more something to be read or something like that. Anyway, that's the contract, and if you've stayed with it for this far, well, that's pretty good, and I thank you for that. So that's about all we have